It took just 2 months for my grandparents to lose virtually everything they had to Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering and the Nazis. But the efforts to recover what was lost have outlasted the lives of Jacques, Daisy, and my dad, Ado. I had a great relationship with my grandmother and was very lucky to have her in my life. I shared many good times with her in Holland as a young child and a young adult until she passed away in 1996, 5 months before I lost my dad to cancer. My memories of Daisy are still incredibly vivid. I can still hear her sing Puccini's O mio babbino caro before bed when she would visit in Connecticut or when I would go spend a couple of weeks every summer in Holland. Each of my visits in Holland would include a drive-by of Herengracht 458, which was Jacques' gallery in Amsterdam. We would also drive by Oostermeer in Ouderkerk, where my dad was born, and this was their home where they lived. We'd also drive by Nijrode Castle in Brooklyn that Jacques bought in 1932 for exhibitions and entertaining. It was in 1937 at Nijrode where Jacques and Daisy met. Jacques held a charity banquet called Wienen aan de Vecht, Vienna on the Vecht River, which made money for a number of charitable causes, including Jewish refugees. Jacques invited Daisy, who was an up-and-coming beautiful opera singer and the daughter of the famous Viennese soprano coloratura Selma Kurz, to perform at this event. And this is truly where their wonderful but all too short love story began. I just want to mention that ironically, just this week, the Jewish Museum in Amsterdam acquired a Martin Monnikendam painting of that party, Vienna on the Vecht River. As Connie Wolf mentioned earlier, Yoel Cohen, the director of the Jewish Museum in Amsterdam, is here tonight. So that was a nice little thing to find out today. One of my favorite pictures included in the restitution, which incidentally once belonged to Catherine the Great, is the Van der Heyden painting, which depicts Nijrode Castle. I remember asking Daisy many, many times, why didn't she still live in her pretty house, Oostermeer, and why couldn't we go play in the castle? And her response to me was always so simple. It was just, after the war, my sweet, things were different. I didn't pry. I do appreciate now how difficult it must have been for her to drive my sister and I by the 3 pieces of real estate that they had and where she spent the shortest and best years of her life. Before World War II, Jacques had amassed an extraordinary art collection consisting of approximately 1,400 works of art, mostly Dutch, Flemish, and Italian old master paintings. He married my grandmother in 1937, and they honeymooned in Egypt. My father was born shortly after, in January 1939. They lived in grand style and were the toast of Amsterdam society. Their parties at Nijrode Castle were legendary. On at least one occasion, Jacques created tableaux vivants, recreations of paintings using live models and physical objects that reproduced specific artworks in his collection. There was no equal to Jacques in the art field. His great eye allowed him to create one of the most important collections of his time. He was not only a dealer, but a tastemaker and an innovator. He put on exhibitions that museums couldn't mount. But on May 10th, 1940, everything changed. Their lives took a tumultuous turn as the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. Jacques, Daisy, and my father were at their country house, Oostermeer, on the day of the invasion. They stayed there as long as they felt they safely could, finally leaving on May 13th to drive into Amsterdam. Some precautions had been taken, and Daisy brought a handbag filled with jewelry, some money, and their passports. Once they reached Amsterdam, it was clear that they would have to flee the Netherlands, and Jacques' most valuable assets, his approximately 1,400 artworks, had to be left behind. He did, however, take with him a small black leather notebook that we call the Black Book now. It contained most of the inventory of his collection. They made the decision to escape by sea. Jacques' mother, Emily, refused to leave and stayed behind at the gallery. 4 friends crowded into a car with them, and they drove to the port at Imouden. As Daisy wrote in one of her diaries, they were not alone in making this trek. The car ride became slower and slower. Horses, cars, ox carts, and bicycles, everything moved in the direction of the ocean. When they reached the port, they managed to secure passage on the SS Bodegraven, which was heading to South America after stopping in England. Their visas had expired the day before the Nazis invaded, and there was no time to get into the city to pick up the renewals. They did make it on board without the right papers, partially because a Canadian soldier recognized Daisy as she had sang for the troops. For Jacques, though, there was only a taste of freedom. 2 days into the journey, he went up to the deck for some air, and he broke his neck in an accidental fall into a hold on the ship. Daisy searched for him, and she couldn't find him. Finally, a crew member went to look for him, and he too fell into the hold, but was cushioned by Jacques' body, so he survived, but he was paralyzed as a result of the fall. Jacques was buried in England at Falmouth. Daisy was not allowed off the boat or to stay for the funeral because she was considered an enemy alien with her Austrian passport. She and my father had to continue their journey across the Atlantic, eventually settling in New York, where they stayed for the duration of the war. Daisy was able to retrieve and brought with her the black book that was in Jacques' pocket, which ultimately would be the key document we used to establish claims to Jacques' collection. Shortly after the Nazi invasion in May 1940, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, second in command of the Third Reich, and his henchmen looted the paintings, drawings, antiquities, and other works of art in Jacques' collection. Under explicit warnings that her property and the property that had belonged to Jacques would be confiscated, and worse, that she would be deported, Emily, Jacques' mother, was persuaded to vote her minority block of shares in the gallery for a, quote, sale of its assets to Hermann Göring and his associate Alois Miedel at a fraction of their value. But Daisy, who together with my father inherited the majority of the outstanding shares in the gallery, specifically refused to consent to the proposed sale when contacted by Jacques' former employees, but this forced sale to the Nazis went on anyway. Göring took approximately 800 of the most valuable artworks to Germany, and many were displayed in his several residences, including Karenhall, his country estate near Berlin. Miedel began operating his own art dealership out of Jacques' gallery, using its remaining stock, its former employees, its infrastructure, and the goodwill of the Goudstikker name. In 1945, during the liberation of Germany, Allied forces discovered more than 200 artworks looted by Göring in Germany and sent them to the central collecting point in Munich, where recovered artworks were cataloged. These and other artworks that the Nazis stole from the Netherlands were returned to be held in trust by the Dutch government for their lawful owners. This meant that all property recovered from the Nazis would be returned to the governments of the countries of origin so that it could be returned to its original owners. Daisy then returned to the Netherlands in 1946 after the war with the expectation that she would be able to reclaim her stolen property. But she was met instead with great hostility by a post-war Dutch government. She confronted a restitution regime that did everything in its power to make it difficult for Jews to recover their property. After the war, interests of the plundered Jews were subordinated to the economic recovery of the Netherlands. There was a rule that actually offered protection for people and institutions that had acquired stolen Jewish property during the war. Because of these policies, Daisy was unable to recover the stolen Göring works that were returned to the Netherlands by the Allies. Instead, the Dutch government kept the works in their national collection, but never gained legal title to them. In the summer of 1997, after the deaths of both Daisy and my father, and the time when Holocaust-related looting was looked at again, a Dutch journalist named Peter den Hollander searched the Netherlands for the sole living heir of Jacques Goudstikker. He hit a couple of roadblocks, as most of the Goudstikker family was murdered in Auschwitz. The other roadblock was the fact that my grandmother remarried in 1952, and her second husband, Marei von Saher, adopted my father, and they both took his name. After a little more detective work, Peter eventually found my mom, tracked her down in Connecticut. Peter explained that the Dutch government had adopted a new policy that allowed victims of the Holocaust and their families to make claims to their property that had been seized during the war. This meant that my mother would have apparently a fair opportunity, one that Daisy clearly didn't have, to make a claim to the art collection that belonged to Jacques and was stolen by the Nazis in 1940. A few weeks after that call from Peter, he arrived in Connecticut armed with information he had gathered from the Dutch archives, and then we exchanged many questions. The next day, Peter and I were off to the National Archives in Washington. That was an eye-opener. I was completely stunned. We spent 2 days looking at top secret, classified documents of the shady deals that transpired during the war. I really did not even know that these documents existed. I was literally looking at and reading about the forced sale of my grandfather's gallery. It was there in Washington when it became clear to me that my family had been robbed twice, first by the Nazis and then by the Dutch government. Many people have said to us along the way, what's happened has happened, it's the past, move on. You'll never get a government to budge. But we couldn't. We recognized that it was our responsibility to restore our family's legacy, so we began the grueling process. The Dutch press went crazy. Peter den Hollander had uncovered a piece of Dutch history that many thought had been put to sleep, and some probably would have preferred it stay that way. The magnitude of our task was clear in our first formal meeting with governmental officials, which took place at the Dutch consulate in New York in late '97. We had been advised that the Dutch government representatives wished to discuss the Goudstikker matter, but we were warned to come alone without attorneys. Well, we were met at the consulate by senior officials from the Ministry of Culture with their governmental attorneys. They attempted to discourage us from pursuing the restitution of our family's collection. They did exactly the opposite. More than ever, it became so obvious that the government was afraid that their secret of more than 50 years would be shamefully exposed by two women from Connecticut. So, with advice from our dearest family friend, we hired Dutch and U.S. counsel and embarked on quite an endeavor. Unfortunately, in the beginning, we faced the same seemingly insurmountable difficulties and bureaucratic roadblocks that Daisy had faced half a century before. Our initial attempts to resolve our claim with the Dutch government were unsuccessful, as were the actions that we brought in the Dutch courts. But in 2002, the Dutch government created the Restitutions Committee, which was intended to evaluate claims and render advice to the government on how they should be resolved. This finally presented us with a new opportunity to have our claim heard. Years after Jacques' gallery was looted, the government realized they had to do something. The time really seemed to be right. In December 2005, this effort culminated in a hearing before the Dutch Restitutions Committee, which issued its advice substantially in our favor. That advice, however, was kept confidential, pending a final decision by the State Secretary of the Ministry of Education, Culture, and Science. My mother and I, along with our team of attorneys, art historians, researchers, friends, and advisors, traveled to The Hague on Wednesday, February 1st, 2006, with the expectation that a decision by the State Secretary was imminent. But delays ensued and rumors were rampant. Finally, after 5 days of waiting patiently, on Monday, February 6th, 2006, at about 4 o'clock, the call from the state secretary came, and in a hushed room, Dick Schonis, our lead Dutch attorney, took the call, listened, wrote some things down, and then raised his hand in relief and victory. He announced that the Dutch government was restituting 200 Goudstikker works to my family. The feeling and emotion in that room was indescribable. After years of fighting and almost 66 years since the Nazi looting, justice was finally achieved. We got back what rightfully belonged to our family. Well, as these cases have become well publicized and the sometimes enormous sums of money paid for recovered artworks are widely reported, some have criticized the lawyers and the researchers who have helped us recover our artworks after years of effort, and some even criticize us, the claimants. Our lawyers have been called bounty hunters. It's been said that the restitution industry is a huge money-making operation. Some have criticized us for selling some of the works we've recovered rather than donating them to museums, showing that we're not doing this for the money. I find these comments completely offensive. Not only have we made donations and created this beautiful exhibition of some of our recovered artworks, but let's not forget that these paintings are being recovered for the heirs of their true owners. And who, except the families of these owners, have the right to decide what to do with their property? And as for the researchers and lawyers who worked for years on these cases with no certainty of victory, we could not have been successful without them. Is it wrong for us to pay them for their efforts, even if that means selling some of the artworks that we've recovered? What we owe them, we can't put a value on. I wonder if underlying these views and critics is really another anti-Semitic sentiment. So as you can see, the restitution and the exhibition are really about so much more than beautiful art. The restitution represents a small piece of historical justice from a time that some have chosen to forget. When I look at the paintings that we have recovered and walk through the galleries here at the museum, I think about my dad. And I imagine the grandfather that I never knew. I try to visualize my grandmother at 29, leaving everything she knew behind with a baby in her arms, and then losing her husband 2 days into her horrific escape to freedom. I think about Hermann Goering inside my grandfather's gallery, choosing to steal specific paintings for his own private collection. I think about the fact that my dad never saw any of his father's art collection intact and how justice seems to have skipped a couple of generations. I also think about my grandmother's struggle after the war to get back what was hers, and then our struggle with the Dutch government more recently. Years of fighting for our family's heritage and what we always believed so strongly in. But last, I do think about how wonderful it felt when we finally succeeded and how proud Jacques, Daisy, and my dad would be. Thank you. Now I just want to welcome Larry up to the podium, and he is going to discuss the restitution in a little bit more detail with you.
Good evening. I want to thank the museum and its directors and staff for inviting us to speak to you and welcoming us to this wonderful museum. I know I heard some of you groan when Marei said that they would be followed by the lawyer. But I think it's important to put the extraordinary story told by these two extraordinary women into context, both this exhibition into the context of what they are doing, and to put what they are doing into the context of Holocaust restitution. But I will try to be brief and not bore you. As you just heard, the exhibition is very much more than art. Charlène poignantly explained how it is also a testament to the legacy of Jacques Goudstikker, a reminder of the tragic loss of life and identity that were the hallmark of the Holocaust, and a tribute to an extraordinary family's tireless effort to right past wrongs. The restitution of 200 Goudstikker works in 2006 was an historic event that ended a nearly 10-year legal and emotional struggle with the Dutch government waged by her and Marei. My colleagues and I have been privileged as lawyers to assist them in their efforts in the Netherlands and around the world to recover the assets that were looted in 1940 by the most notorious villains in history. It has been a true honor, and I am the guy that on the banner of the first page of the Wall Street Journal was called a bounty hunter. Permit me to start by putting the Goudstikker restitution into its historical perspective. Displacement of art, in the greatest displacement of art in human history. The volume of artwork stolen by the Nazis during World War II from both museums and private collections throughout Europe is staggering. The wholesale pillaging was an official Nazi policy, not a mere byproduct of war. Much of the looted art was intended to fill the Führer Museum that Adolf Hitler was planning to build in his hometown of Linz, Austria. The United States government has estimated that German forces and other Nazi agents, before and during World War II, seized or coerced the sale of approximately 1/5 of all Western art then in existence. If one adds books, manuscripts, and other cultural artifacts, the number of items of property stolen runs into the millions. The value of the looted art alone exceeded the total value of all artwork in the United States in 1945. It has been estimated at $2.5 billion at the time of the looting, or a present value of more than $20 billion, and more than 100,000 artworks stolen by the Nazis have still not been located. As Charlène recounted, more than 200 of the Goudstikker artworks taken to Germany by Göring were recovered by the Allied forces after the war and returned to the Netherlands to be held in trust for the rightful owners pursuant to the established policy of the Allies. But, as Charlène also explained, when Desi returned to the Netherlands to reclaim what the Nazis stole, she was unable to recover the looted Göring works in the hands of the Dutch government, supposedly being held for her. A committee formed by the Dutch government in the late 1990s to examine post-war restitution procedures concluded that the response of the government agency responsible for the restitution of artworks was legalistic, bureaucratic, cold, and often even callous. At that time, in the 90s, there was a worldwide re-examination of claims to artworks looted during World War II. As a result, a new movement to restitute looted artworks not returned to their true owners after the war began to take shape. Perhaps the most important impetus for this was that scholars and journalists took advantage of the opening of previously closed archives to examine post-war history. The Rape of Europa by Lynn Nicholas, published in 1994, was a pioneering study that set the stage for what was to follow. A movie based on the book is running on the screen outside. In January 1995, the Bard Graduate Center for Studies in the Decorative Arts in New York City held a symposium entitled The Spoils of War, at which many papers, including one by me, examined issues relating to looted art. Also in 1995, Konstantin Akinsha and Grigory Kozlov published Beautiful Loot, the Soviet Plunder of Europe's Art Treasures. Hector Feliciano's book, The Lost Museum, the Nazi Conspiracy to Steal the World's Greatest Works of Art, followed in 1997. And finally, in 1998, the United States government hosted the Washington Conference on Nazi Looted Assets, at which representatives of 44 countries met to discuss how to deal with the looted property, including artworks, still out there, but which had not been restituted. The experts at the conference considered and debated the many issues raised by the continuing discovery of Nazi looted assets, including art. The conference promulgated 11 principles concerning Nazi confiscated art, among them that pre-war owners and heirs should be encouraged to come forward to make their claims known, and once this happened, steps should be taken expeditiously to develop fair and just claims procedures with liberal rules of evidence so that the art can be returned to its rightful owners. Much good came out of this, with several nations researching art with questionable provenance and developing the requisite legal regimes, and with many auction houses, museums, and collectors shunning art with gaps in provenance from 1933 to 1945. The Dutch government was one of those that did respond to these renewed concerns even before the Washington Conference, announcing in October 1997 a new policy that allowed claims to be made for the restitution of artworks that had been returned to the Netherlands following the war, but never restituted to the rightful owners. In January 1998, Marei presented her claim to the State Secretary in charge of Cultural Affairs for the return of the Goudstikker works that remained in the custody of the Dutch government. Her application was denied, and proceedings taken to overturn that decision were decided against her. In 2002, in response to the Washington Principles, the Dutch government adopted new restitution guidelines that gave Marei hope. So in 2004, after years of defeat and frustration, she filed an application under those new guidelines and spent 2 more years fighting the case in the Netherlands. This effort culminated in a hearing before the Dutch Restitutions Committee, which issued its advice in December 2005, substantially in Marei's favor, and finally, as Charlène described, the extraordinary moment the family had been awaiting for more than 60 years, the decision of the State Secretary, Mary van der Laan, to return the 200 Goring works to Marei. A great story with a happy ending. It is most certainly a great saga. And the restitution of artworks by the Dutch government was a happy event. But as Charlène sadly noted, Jacques and Anita were not there to witness this historic development. But the Dutch restitution is by no means the end of the Goudstikker saga. More than 1,000 of the looted works were not found by the Allies after the war. They remain missing. The family is equally committed to locating and recovering these artworks and engaged the noted art recovery specialist, Clemens Toussaint, as you heard, is here tonight and will shortly be up here with us, who put together an expert team of art researchers and historians. Working in archives throughout Europe and the United States, they have been conducting a massive research project to identify and locate the missing works. Clemens will be up here in a few minutes and tell you a little bit about how one goes about finding 1,000 lost paintings. But they have been doing that, and as a result of their work, to date, more than 100 of the works have been located, and there have been more than 35 restitutions. It is noteworthy that in all the successful restitutions, some of which you will hear about in a few minutes, the museums and galleries in possession of the looted art did not force Marei to prove her claim in court, did not defend on the ground that the statute of limitations barred the claim, and did not argue that returning the painting would open the floodgates to myriad claims against museums about their collections. Rather, upon discovering the presence of Nazi-looted art in their collections, the possessors took the matter seriously, did the requisite research, negotiated in good faith, and ultimately did the right thing. Unfortunately, the Goudstikker family has been less successful in resolving claims against U.S. and Canadian museums, which have not been anywhere near as cooperative as their Western European counterparts when presented with claims, often coming up with reasons and excuses for not dealing with the issue. A case in point involves what are perhaps the most valuable works looted by the Nazis from Jacques. 2 monumental images of Adam and Eve by Cranach the Elder, which Jacques acquired in May 1931 at an auction in Berlin of the famed Stroganoff collection. These paintings were not part of the Stroganoff collection, but they had been included in order to give the collection some cachet. In any event, they were among Jacques' most valued works, as demonstrated by a photograph showing Jacques with Queen Wilhelmina at an exhibition in the Rijksmuseum, featuring Eve, that was sponsored by the Association of Fine Arts Dealers in the Netherlands, which had been founded by Jacques and others. These pictures came to the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, California, in the early 1970s. Marei discovered them in November 2000 and demanded their return, which was refused. After many years of unsuccessful settlement negotiations and 2 failed mediations, the family started a case in federal court in Los Angeles in 2007 seeking their return. Unfortunately, the lower court held that a new California statute passed unanimously by the California legislature extending the statute of limitations for Holocaust victims against museum and galleries was unconstitutional, and Marei's claim was therefore dismissed. Marei filed an appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That appeal was supported by the Attorney General of California and several other friends of the court, including Bet Tzedek Legal Services, the Jewish Federation Council of Greater Los Angeles, the American Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and the Commission for Art Recovery. Nevertheless, in August 2009, the Court of Appeals affirmed in part and reversed in part. While they said Marei could go back to the lower court and rely on the standard California statute of limitations, they upheld the ruling that the special statute intended to help Holocaust victims was unconstitutional because it encroached on federal power to make and settle war. We disagreed. Marei courageously, instead of going back to the lower court, got a stay of that order and filed a petition for certiorari with the Supreme Court of the United States. Very few of these are granted. On October 4, just a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court of the United States issued an order inviting the acting Solicitor General to file briefs in the case expressing the views of the United States. In other words, the court said that before it decides whether or not to hear the case, it wants to know what the federal government's view is of the issues presented. We are hopeful that that view will be consistent with Marei's position, and indeed, in our briefs to the Supreme Court, we asked the court to do that. We are gratified it did. That is the current status of the case. More to report later. Let me end with some brief observations about where the restitution of Nazi-looted art is now and where it may be heading. Many claimants in the United States and Europe have hit roadblocks over the past several years. Possessors of Nazi-looted art have successfully used technical defenses, such as the statute of limitations, to fend off legitimate claims for the recovery of looted Holocaust property, even though, I might add, the guidelines of organizations like the American Association of Museums specifically provide that member museums may elect to waive such technical defenses. Also, claimants have found considerable difficulty in recovering Nazi-looted art held by countries in Europe, even some of those that have adopted some form of legal regime to facilitate restitution, and particularly in those that haven't. But very recent developments have given cause for hope that the future of Holocaust restitution will see greater advances being made to right the wrongs that 44 countries acknowledge in Washington have to be addressed. I don't have time to discuss those tonight, but hopefully you can come back and do that at a later time. This past June, I was privileged to attend a new Holocaust-era assets conference in Prague, in the Czech Republic, where some 49 governments and 152 non-governmental organizations came together to assess the impact of the Washington Principles. Clearly, much progress has been made, but at the same time, there is much more to be done, especially in the United States. Ironically, the American delegation very strongly urged all of the countries attending to discourage the use of statutes of limitations and other technical defenses to prevent the resolution of Holocaust claims on the merits. But here we are in the Supreme Court fighting that very issue. They issued another set of guidelines, now the Terrorism Declaration, and time will tell. They're stronger than the Washington Principles, but time will tell if they are honored. As I close, let me leave you with one word: remembrance. As we contemplate the beautiful paintings and historical ephemera salvaged from Jacques Goudstikker's collection and his short life, let us not forget the story they tell of Jacques, of his relatives who perished, and of so many others who suffered and lost everything at the hands of the most evil empire of all time. But sometimes it is easier to forget. Indeed, there are many, as Charlène mentioned, including journalists, politicians, and even some heirs of survivors, who say enough is enough. Let sleeping dogs lie. And as Charlène said, others have gone even further and actually criticized the lawyers and researchers who have helped claimants recover their artworks and even the claimants themselves. Happily, most commentators have lashed out at such critics, reminding them that these artworks are being recovered by the heirs of the true owners and have been taken away from them by the murderers of the Third Reich, often in the course of carrying out the final solution. The commentator Eric Gibson once asked the following question: why do we bother with recovering Nazi-looted art at all? Plundering is, after all, the handmaiden of war, and the world's museums are filled with objects lifted during conflicts from the Romans on. And Gibson's answer to his own question eloquently describes what many of us who work in this area believe. Why do we bother? Because the Nazis weren't simply out to enrich themselves. Their looting was part of the final solution. They wanted to eradicate a race by extinguishing its culture as well as its people. This gives these works of art a unique resonance, and the more so since some of them were used as barter for safe passage out of Germany or Austria for family members. The objects are symbols of a terrible crime. Recovering them is an equally symbolic form of justice, but perhaps the most pointed and chilling reminder of what this is all about comes from, of all people, Heinrich Himmler, Hitler's Secret Service chief, who declared that the Nazis had to kill all the Jews, because if not, and I quote, their grandchildren will ask for their property back. My colleagues and I are very proud to say that we have helped to prove Herr Himmler quite correct. So what is this all about? Marai's and Charlène's long and continuing struggle to recover Jacques' looted property, restore his legacy, and mount their traveling exhibition in the face of those who oppose them at every turn, and many who mock the recovery of Holocaust loot as an unnecessary industry, and urge us simply to forget the past, is but one of many individual and collective efforts that serve to compel us to remember the horror that was the Holocaust, and thus to celebrate the humanity and mankind's spirit of survival. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Schifrin, Director of Public Programs here. Welcome. Welcome, Clemens Toussaint. This is an extraordinary group of people. I think I wanted to start by bringing Clemens into the conversation. And we had talked before about looking at 4 images, 2 paintings, and using those to just help us figure out what does an art sleuth do?
Well, good evening. I'm not really in agreement with this term art sleuth or art detective. I studied art history and was my plan was to make some museum career in Germany, but when I found out that so many paintings were kept in depositories or in the collections without giving their history and without making no effort to find the true owners, I basically invented a new job, inventing techniques to find the true people and to help them to find their lost paintings or art objects of all kind. We will tell you a little bit how that works, because people often ask, yeah, but how can you find a needle in a haystack 60 years after it was stolen? And it might be in some collection somewhere in some country. So what the family luckily had, and you heard that from Charlène earlier, was this little leather booklet, which was a kind of a travel inventory of the gallerist, which he had prepared in case he had to leave. But it's a very fragmentary documentation of the works, because when you see it, it just gives a title, a dimension. Sometimes it tells where it was bought, where it was exhibited, but there's no photo, there's nothing to visualize the painting. So this was the starting point, basically, of our research, and we went through many photographic archives all over the world to try to re-identify these paintings. I give you one example. In this black book, there is a mentioning of a Degas drawing with 4 dancers. But Degas, when you look in the catalog raisonnées, did thousands of works, and they only depict dancers. But we narrowed it down to a few dozen works who had 4 dancers, and checked each of this work and the history of each of this work. And in the end, we had maybe 3 or 4 works left that had a gap in the provenance in the 30s. So we concentrated on those works, we contacted the museums, we went to see the collectors, and of course everybody said, yeah, but our work is certainly not the Goudstikker work. And then finally, we found another photograph in an archive in the Netherlands showing this painting. And on the back, you see a stamp from a photographer in The Hague. So we searched the history of the photographer, and this photographer was working exactly at the time when Jacques Goudstikker had the painting in The Hague. So this was the proof that one of these paintings, which was in the museum in Israel, was in fact the Goudstikker painting. And then Larry Kaye went there and had long discussions with the museum director, and maybe he can say a few words how that went, after we had then finally given proof that this is the work which once was owned by Jacques Goudstikker.
Very briefly, I went to Jerusalem and met with James Snyder, the director, who I knew from 30 years earlier when I helped him with a rental matter for an apartment in New York. And he wasn't happy when I told him that this picture that had been donated by a major donating family in the 70s belonged to the Goudstikker family and been looted by the Nazis. His research team immediately said, oh, this is in a private collection in Chicago, the one that Goudstikker lost. But because we were able to present them with the evidence that Clemens' team had provided, it took a year, but they studied it carefully and finally were convinced by Clemens' team that it was the same picture and returned it to the family.
Should we look at the second painting?
Yeah, this is another story of a successful identification of one of the Goudstikker works and location, and also then recovery. Jacques owned a couple of paintings of one of the few female masters of the Dutch 17th century art, Rachel Ruysch, and we just had again a title, Still Life, and she only did still lives, and we had a dimension. So we found also a couple of paintings in a similar dimension. And in the literature, there was a mentioning of 2 paintings which had a similar look, but they appeared in history at different moments. So we had a suspicion it's one and the same painting, because if you put both stories together, you have the full provenance. But to prove that, we needed to see the backside of the painting. The painting was hanging in one of the most famous museums in Germany, in the Dresden Gemälde Gallery, and luckily one of our team members had a good contact to the restoration department where the painting was under examination. And she went there and she could see the backside of the painting, and there it was, the label of the gallery with the number, which was the number in the black book. So this was really the proof that in fact 2 paintings were one and the same painting, and the painting which was in Dresden was the painting that Jacques had lost. I mean, the story is that Goering took, you know, really the most important paintings for himself. He had good advisor to recognize what had value and what was of lesser importance, and he sold most of the remaining works, meaning about 1,000 paintings, in a prospering German art market in the 40s, because when the population in Germany understood that the war was lost, they were all afraid that the currency will gone, and at the auctions there was one world record after the other. So this was a very flourishing art market, and Göring took benefit and sold a big chunk of Goudstikker's stock, made a big profit with it, and this is how all these works went to different destinations. Most of them, of course, we found in Germany. Most of them went back to the Netherlands after the war, because it's Dutch art, and this then became more and more a collectible item in private Dutch collections. But, and that's, Larry mentioned it earlier, I mean, the museums who had the money after the war to build their collections were here in the United States. So many of the works are in fact in American collections, and we were not as successful until now here. But at least in Western Europe, Marei was able to have this huge restitution from the Netherlands, and add another 30 to 40 paintings which we recovered from private collections in other museums in Europe. It's an ongoing effort, and each painting is a new story, is a new detective story, because each painting tells a different story of people dealing with it, their obsessions and their secrets, and that's what makes it so exciting to start again and again and look for the next one.
I guess in defense of my slightly flipped description of your work, art detective is about the most exciting thing I can think of, so.
But let Larry now explain how we recovered the painting, because my job is to find them, and then I give him the results, and then he's going out and trying to convince people to do the right thing. And here it was a museum in Germany, and it's quite impressive what happened.
It's an interesting story and a microcosm of everything that we do. But I was invited by New York University to speak in Dresden at the Dresden Art Museums. And it was an international conference on art in the 21st century. And I accepted the invitation, and a few weeks before I was supposed to go, Clemens called me and said, "We've discovered a Goudstikker painting in the Gemäldegalerie Gallery of the Dresden Art Museum." So I thought I would write a letter to the director, and I did. I thanked him for inviting me to speak at the upcoming and important conference. And I said, by the way, we represent the Goudstikker family, and our researchers have told us that there is a looted Holocaust picture from the Goudstikker family in the Gemäldegalerie Gallery. I got no response. I, with trepidation, went to the conference armed with Clemens' dossier on the picture, and went to register. And at that point, the director, the deputy director, and the head of the Gemäldegalerie Gallery all came up to me to thank me for my letter and said that they understood it. I then, the next day, went to a meeting with the director of the Gemäldegalerie Gallery, and they showed me their file, which of course had documentation that they got when they acquired it in the 1950s or so, with testamentary evidence that it had been in a German family for many, many, many years. Of course, it had the Goudstikker label right on the back. And we sat with a lawyer from the state, because it's a state museum, and the director, I'll never forget it, said, "Mr. Kaye, I'm looking at the dossier, it's very serious, and we do not want Nazi loot in the Dresden Art Museum." I said, "Well, let's do something about it." He said, "We have to talk to the state." I went out of the office, and at 2 o'clock that afternoon, I took the podium to give a presentation on art restitution generally, including what had happened with the Goudstikker collection. At 2 minutes of 2, I got a message that the state had agreed that the Rachel Roy's picture should be restituted to Marei von Saher. I thus, when I got to the podium, as I got to the slide on this picture, which I would have skipped by if that hadn't happened, I was able to announce from the podium that the picture was being restituted by the Dresden Art Museum to Marei. The director, the deputy director, and the head of the Gemäldegalerie Gallery stood up and got a standing ovation. It was a great moment in what I do, and shows that we're not bounty hunters. We're lawyers trying to help clients, and we have clients like these and researchers and art historians like Clemens the job gets done. And it's just a beautiful story that really makes me happy to do what I do.
There are many stories in the story, and one of the stories is, of course, about Jacques Goudstikker himself. And the title of this show is Reclaimed, and among the things that are reclaimed are not just the work and the paintings, but in a way his reputation as being one of the great dealers and tastemakers of Europe, in the 30s. And this is something we had talked a little bit about last night. I wanted to, I'm sorry I'm going out of order, could we get slide 10, please? This is a picture that you were showing before of your grandfather, and he looks like an extraordinary man, and I'm just wondering, I know that neither of you actually got to know him, but I'm just wondering what else that you know or have heard about him in terms of, what did it feel like for him when he got a piece of art? What was his inner life like in any way? Is there anything else about how he presented himself that we want to bring back as we're kind of reclaiming something about him as a person?
I don't know really that much about how he conducted his business, other than that he was obviously a brilliant man, and some have called him a bon vivant. My grandmother shared more personal stories about him with my sister and I, so I can't really talk so much about what he did, other than he did collect different tastes for everyone, because he was a dealer, and he truly had an eye for what was going to be the hot thing in the future. He was a tastemaker and innovator. But Daisy shared mostly with me how much she loved him. And she remarried, but she only spoke about Jacques, her first husband, and clearly her true love. And she shared a few little stories of his lavish lifestyle. He loved to eat and cook, and he read cookbooks all the time to help satisfy his cravings, and just funny little stories like that.
I think he must have been a very passionate man. I really believe that.
And maybe my dad was a little bit like him.
Yeah.
Talking about people and stories, last night a woman named Hannah Marcus came up to us as we were standing and told a rather remarkable story. Marei, do you want to say what she said?
Last night, that was for me almost the highlight of the evening. We were getting ready to do our little presentation, and this wonderful elderly lady came up and introduced herself. I'm Hannah, and I have been waiting for this exhibition to arrive here, and I wanted to meet you so badly. I've been so looking forward to it. And she was on the same boat on a kinder transport that Jacques, Daisy, and my late husband were on. And this is the second woman so far that we have met. We've met one other one in Greenwich, Connecticut. So it was very emotional to meet this wonderful elderly lady, knowing she was there with part of our family and looking great.
She even presented, I guess, the bill of passage she had kept.
Yes. It was amazing.
I was going to ask one more question, and then I wanted to turn it over to our audience. I'm sure they have many questions, which has to do really like, where is the collection now, or where are you in the process? I know that this exhibition is coming to an end, and in a way that this mini collection, or the presentation of it, will be changed in some way. What is the work that is left to be done?
Well, the work that is left to be done is for all of us. The team will keep on working because we are looking for the remaining paintings that are out there. The exhibition will be going on until end of March, and then some of our favorite paintings will actually end up in my home.
Well, I just want to add, part of the goal of the exhibition was also to create the beautiful catalog that we did. So this catalog sort of is also a testament to what we've all been through, and the catalog will be around forever. So the exhibition can't go on forever. It's a lot of work, it costs a lot of money, but the catalog, which is not just a catalog, it has essays by Clemens and by Larry and by scholars in Israel on the Holocaust and by a wonderful woman from Yad Vashem in Israel. It's a wonderful book, so that will carry on.
All right, we're going to walk around with 2 microphones, one on each side, so please do use the microphone.
Thank you.
Hello.
I'm curious about your grandmother and what type of life she led during the remainder of World War II, living in Amsterdam. Was she left alone, or?
She escaped on the boat.
Oh.
So my grandmother, yeah. So, oh, my great-grandmother.
Great-grandma.
Right. Sorry, I heard grandmother. Her life was threatened. She was threatened with deportation, but sold her minority share of the gallery, and in exchange was saved. I think she passed away in 1951.
She was taken care of. They made sure nothing happened to her.
In response to the difficulty of getting work from museums in this country, is there an effort being used with social media? Because for one, the Jewish community, are high donors of museums and numerous things that really reaching out to inspire people to respond that way.
Well, one of the purposes of this exhibition, which has now been going on a little over 2 years, is to bring this problem to the attention of the museum-going community. There's a conflict in the minds, I think, of some museum people, and there's been a lot written on this, but even sometimes with Jewish museums, not this one, but whether they're museums first or institutions that promote Jewish culture first. And I've met with trustees of Jewish museums in other parts of the country, and I've met with museums and their boards of trustees. And museums are very proprietary, and a lot is now being written on the ethics of museum officials. There's been a call, actually in a recent article, that museum officials who do not do the right thing about stolen art in their collection should be prosecuted criminally. So there's a changing culture, but I think the suggestion that we use social networks, which were developed after my time, to let people know what's going on and solicit their support, I think is very important. Though I'm bound by legal ethics and professional responsibility to stick only to the record when we talk about a pending case, we think it's important that the people of California know what happened to the unanimous statute passed by the legislature, to recognizing that claims for the recovery of Holocaust loot are different from all other claims for art stolen, and that something special had to be done. That's been struck down. It was a 2-to-1 decision. There was a passionate dissent, and Marei is still fighting the good fight, and we hope it gets resolved in our favor in the Supreme Court. But no matter what happens, she'll be back in court fighting for this, and the support of people, and the more people who learn about what's going on, the better. I think that's a good idea, and we're going to consider that.
We're going to have time for one more question. Our gallery is going to be open for another 40 minutes, and our guests will be here for, I know Larry has to catch a plane, but you'll be around for a little bit if you want
Right,
to talk
yes,
informally
yes.
and ask more questions. And who is our final question?
I'm Polly Bergtown. My parents, Sophia and Alexander Hurst, were friends of Jacques Goudstikker. I remember he came to our home. I remember his first wife by the name of Plukje. I remember Daisy very well.
I can't
my
wait
ch-
to talk to you.
Yeah.
See these things, how that happens?
This seems to happen a lot, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Oh my goodness.
I think she's coming to talk to you now. Why wait?
I remember him so well. They want to hear my parents.
You might know more about certain things than we
I
do.
remember Tante Emily.
You do?
Yeah, I don't think I can get up here.
I'll help you. I'll help you. Oh my goodness. That is such. Oh, you're sitting on the mic.
Yeah, and after the war.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
lost- we
Yeah.
lost-
Just speak in there.
Oh. After the war, we lost also everything, and we had some of the same problems that you had recovering art. My parents bought a few paintings from Jack, but for me, it's a very good memory. He was an extremely special man. And when he came to our house, it was a very special occasion.
I cannot believe that we're sitting here with you. You knew Jacques, we didn't.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
And when I speak about him, I visualize him, you know. I visualize his first wife too. She was 11 years older than he was, and she died, and then he remarried Daisy. And my parents went to the Kasteel Nijenrode and had a wonderful time. They wore 17th century outfits.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and it was all in style. It was just, yeah.
This is a very special moment for you too, not just for me.
Yeah. So it's great for me to meet you.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Did you know my father as well?
No, I didn't. We lived in The Hague, so we didn't live in Amsterdam, but he would come to our house in The Hague. But I remember the story and everything.
Well, I'm so glad to have met you.
Well, that's about the best ending I can possibly imagine.